Hi, I'm John. Welcome back to my channel. I've got quite a few books to share with you today. These are books I've read over the past 2 weeks, and I was sick about 2 weeks ago. It lasted for several days, and so I got a lot of reading done. I probably won't go very in-depth about most of these books because if I did, this video would be an hour long, and I don't think anybody wants that. So the first book is Aliens Genocide by David Bischoff, and this is a Dark Horse novel. I think these are based on comics or graphic novels. I'm not really sure which. And this was okay. I've read 3 or 4 of these books now. There are a lot of aliens novels. And this was my least favorite of the several that I've read. The reason being, I think, that most of this is about kind of boring things, really. Boring in the context of an aliens novel. Usually in an aliens novel, people are trapped with the alien, trying to run away from it and trying to survive, usually for some reason, usually in tunnels or caves or, even on spaceships and space stations, usually it's tunnels, caves. Anyway, there wasn't much of that on this. There was a little bit, but it was kind of not the focal point of the novel. The focal point was that there is a pharmaceutical company creating a drug from the ground up aliens and then from royal jelly secreted by the queen. And they're using a very minuscule amount of this royal jelly so there are different levels of queens. There are smaller queens, and then there are kind of overarching queens, I guess. And they're using royal jelly from the overarching queen of the aliens. And somebody brought her to Earth at some point, and she got loose. Or, well, the face huggers got loose, I guess. I don't know exactly. That's also in the novels, but I haven't read those. And there was a big, they had to go and clean out the aliens, and there's still hives around. And so it's an ongoing issue. But this pharmaceutical company in New York, I believe it's in New York, is making this drug that's kind of like a super amphetamine, really. And so the guy who owns this company, he realizes that they're running out of the royal jelly. And so he petitions the military, I have this drug, we can make super soldiers, but I need a ship and I need soldiers to go to the hive world and get more royal jelly. We don't have to take a queen, we just have to go into the hive and steal the royal jelly. And so he's also very rich on paper, but he's actually in a lot of debt to some people who want to kill him. So he needs to leave the planet. So he goes off with the soldiers to the hive world. And what they don't know is that there is a civil war going on the hive world. When the people took the big queen off the planet, all these other queens started producing offspring, and there is a genetic mutation. So most of the xenomorphs are black, but there's a mutation that turns some of them red. And so there's this big fight between the black xenomorphs and the red xenomorphs. And they come down in the middle of all that. So our main character is named Alex, and she's a serious soldier. She's in the Colonial Space Marines, but she spent a lot of time hunting down queens in the hives on Earth. And she was traumatized because she was having a relationship with one of her subordinates. And in a hive in Hollywood, he was killed in a very horrific way. So she's been dealing with that for several years. And she's very tough. All the soldiers are very tough, and they're very experienced with the aliens. And they touch down on the planet in the middle of this huge civil war where hundreds and hundreds of aliens are fighting and killing each other, and they have to figure out how to get into the hive to steal the royal jelly. And that took up about the last 50 pages or so. Most of it is the inner workings of this pharmaceutical company and the rich guy trying to get more money and the military figuring out what to do with fire. And it was okay. I don't think this would be a very good entry point into the series, but it was all right. It was entertaining at least. And really my problems with it came after I had read it instead of while I was reading it, if that makes sense. And then I read Autumn in the Heavenly Kingdom by Stephen R. Platt. This is a history of the Taiping Civil War in China in the 1850s and 1860s. And this was really good. This was really well written. Now, it was more information than I really wanted. It's not super long or anything. It's just that it was more information than I wanted. And mainly the focus in this book is on how the West dealt with the dynasty that was ruling China at the time and the Taipings, and how they decided which side to support. And now the Taiping Civil War is very interesting in that, so there was a guy, and you'll have to forgive me, I can't remember his name right off the top of my head, but he had been trying very hard all his life to study for and pass a civil servant exam, which was basically completely about Confucianism, from what I understand. It was a very difficult test, and the people running the exam had an idea of who they wanted and who they didn't, I think. So maybe one person out of 100 would pass this exam. He tried 3 times, and he was putting so much pressure on himself. His family had put a lot of pressure on him to pass these tests, and when he failed the 3rd time, basically he thought that his life was over. It was a complete failure. His life was wasted. He was never going to make it. He had a breakdown that lasted for 40 days, around 40 days. And in the middle of this, he came to see himself as the son of the Christian God and the brother of Jesus Christ. And after that, it took quite a while. It took like 10 years or so, but he went around preaching that he was the son of God and the brother of Jesus Christ. And the Taiping rebellion, people started to follow him. And now I have to admit that I wanted more information about that than this book gave me. I wanted to know what the beliefs of the Taipings were. You know, what was the Heavenly King preaching about? What were his beliefs? Did people really believe what he was preaching, or did they just see it as a way to, rebel against the Manchu government? The Heavenly King was really a background character in this, and Platt was mostly focused on British and American ambassadors and how the British and American militaries responded to the Taipings and to the Manchus, and the missionaries. The missionaries and a lot of people in the West came to see the Taiping as basically the people to support because they were Christian, and the Manchus were I hope they were the Manchus. I believe I remember that right. So forgive me if I've got that wrong. They saw the Taiping as the answer to Christianizing China and to, getting a lot of trade going on. Maybe it was just their dream to have a Christian China, basically. And so they kind of didn't look straight at the Heavenly King and his preaching. They thought that his cousin had come and lived with Protestant missionaries for quite some time, I think 8 years. And they had this dream of sending his cousin back to reform his Christianity and make him stop saying that he was the brother of Jesus Christ and all that. It was just really interesting. And the Taiping Civil War was extremely bloody. There was no mercy on either side, and some of the things that happened are just horrific, absolutely horrific. It's thought that 20 million people died in the Taiping Civil War, and you know, a lot of people call it the Taiping Rebellion. Stephen Platt makes an argument that it was an actual full civil war, and I think he makes a good argument for that. There are a lot of maps in this, and I really appreciated that. Something that I didn't like was that, at least as far as I found, there was no guide to pronunciation. And so the whole time that I was reading it, I didn't know how to pronounce people's names. And that really bothers me. I really like to be able to pronounce people's names correctly, and I would have appreciated a pronunciation guide. There was also, you know, an interesting story. There's a lot going on in the middle of this. The British start a war with the Manchu. There are a lot of Westerners coming to China to start militias for fortune and glory. You know, in the middle of this very long civil war, it lasted for 11 years, I believe, 11 or 12 years, long time. The Emperor of China dies, and his 5-year-old son ascends to the throne, and his mother basically takes over all that power. Just a lot going on at that period of time. And I think this is the first book, the first history I've ever read about China. It was just, you know, about China. And it was really good. I was afraid that it wouldn't, I was afraid that I would be lost because I don't know anything really about China. But that really wasn't a problem. Stephen Platt did a really good job with this book, and it was very readable, and I enjoyed it. So the next book I read was Skinwalkers by Tony Hillerman. This is one of his Leaphorn and Chee novels, and these all take place at the what's it called? The Navajo Nation down in the Four Corners region of the southwestern United States. So the Four Corners is where 4 states, they're all kind of square, and they meet up in one point, and it's Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. And Leaphorn and Chee are both part of the Navajo Tribal Police. And I've read several of these books now. They're kind of books that I turn to when I'm not sure what else to read, when I'm in the middle of books. And I really, really enjoy them. I like the way Tony Hillerman writes. He's very respectful of the Navajo culture. And he really loved the American Southwest. And the way he describes it is just wonderful. I love books about the American Southwest for some reason. I think it's because it's so different from where I live, you know. And so in this, there are several murders that have been committed, and nobody really knows why. There are people who haven't done anything to anybody, and they're being killed by people who, well, they don't know who's killing them, really. But it seems like there's no motive for these murders. And one night, Officer Chee is awoken by a cat. He's taken in the stray cat, and it comes in the middle of the night. He thinks it's being chased by a coyote, so he gets up, and somebody shoots at him through the wall of his trailer and almost kills him. And Lieutenant Leaphorn, he can't believe that Officer Chee doesn't know why somebody would try to kill him. But Jim Chee really doesn't know why somebody's trying to kill him. And Leaphorn sends him out to try to figure out what's going on. Leaphorn is kind of distracted because he's dealing with some health problems his wife is having. He thinks that she has Alzheimer's, and he's kind of distracted by that. And Jim Chee knows that, Jim Chee goes over and starts talking to people, trying to figure out what's going on. And he comes to the conclusion that the evidence suggests that someone believes these people are skinwalkers, that they're witches, and that someone is killing them to get back at them, to kind of reverse their black magic. So, and Chee finds out that basically somebody thinks he's a skinwalker, even though he knows he isn't. And it was really good. I really enjoyed this one. I've enjoyed all of these that I've read. I think I've read 4 or 5 of them, something like that. And they're just really good. And the characters do age as the books, it's not a static kind of thing. It's they get older and their lives change, and it was just really good. I really enjoyed this one. After that, I read Common Nonsense by Andy Rooney, and this is a collection of his columns for newspapers and also his segment on 60 Minutes. He used to do a segment on 60 Minutes called A Few Minutes with Andy Rooney. And this is written when he was older. I think he was in his late 70s or early 80s when this came out, I believe. And so a lot of these come away as, an old guy complaining about things that nobody else is really bothered by. Whereas in some of his earlier collections, it was mostly him complaining about things we could all agree on, like mechanics and things like that. And there's a lot of that in there. There's a lot of things that we have in common that he's complaining about. But at the same time, some of it just is a little bit too much. And as he got older, he became more opinionated, and his opinions became more blunt. And so there's one segment in here that I remember really well for some reason, which is him complaining about how there are too many flavors of ice cream. And in his day, there was chocolate and there was vanilla, and if you wanted vanilla, you didn't get chocolate, and if you wanted chocolate, you didn't get vanilla. And now there's Rocky Road, Tutti Frutti, and all these ice cream flavors, and it's too much, and we don't need all these ice cream flavors. And so that, after many pages of that, it started to kind of get to me. But the back end of this book really made up for that. He starts to write about people that he knew who have died, and some of those were very poignant. Some of the people that he knew and the way that he wrote about them, and just how much a lot of love and respect came out for the people that he had known, and I really, really appreciated that. And there was also, and I read this in one of his other books, and I don't remember which it was. It might have been in My War. He wrote a book called My War. He was a journalist during World War II, and he worked for Stars and Stripes in Europe. But he met Ernest Hemingway at a bar, at a hotel. But there was a bar in the hotel, and if you were ever going to meet Ernest Hemingway, it would be at a bar, of course. And Andy Rooney had a very, very negative sentiment about Ernest Hemingway. He thought that he was a jerk. He thought that he acted like a spoiled teenager, basically. And that's interesting. That was just really interesting. And that was really good. Anyway, like I said, the last about 50 pages of this book really made up for the old man complaining about stuff that doesn't need to be complained about segments. And so this isn't a place I would start with Andy Rooney's books or his collections, but it was still good. I'm not sure how many of these there are. I've read 4 of them now, and there are probably several more. I buy them when I see them because I do enjoy that kind of... I always enjoyed watching Andy Rooney's segments when I was younger, and I don't know, it's good to hear somebody complain about certain things, certain things we all have in common, like inflation and all that sort of thing. But like I said, in this one, he kind of crossed the line into old man complaining. But that's okay too. I don't mind. It gets a little repetitive, but it was still good. I'm glad I read it. So after that, I read Borderlands 2. It's a collection of horror stories edited by Thomas F. Monteleone. And this was really good too. There were a lot of good stories in this. There was, let's see if I can remember some of them here. And these kind of crossed the line into taboo subjects. These aren't your standard horror stories about like werewolves or slashers or anything like that. These are more about sexual taboos and kind of unsettling topics like that. How some men treat women as objects, things of that nature. Some of the moral gray areas, if the moral gray areas that we have to deal with in our everyday lives when pushed to an extreme. I hope that makes sense. So let's see. The Chrysalis by Lois Tilton. That was really interesting. It was about an older lady, her husband. So in this world, instead of old people dying, they go into, like butterflies or something. They change their form, or cicadas. And she's dealing with her husband's transition. So once people transition this way, they don't really want anything to do with the people they've known or regular people anymore. And of course, she's nearing the end of her stage, and she goes into the transition, and it doesn't quite work out the way that it should. See, Love Doll, A Fable by Joe R. Lansdale. That is about a man who buys a inflatable sex doll, and she comes to life, and he has some really negative views about women, and she creates her own life. She gets a job and everything like that, and suddenly she goes to school, and he's just a loser basically, and it's a transition from her being a sex doll into him being a sex doll. Joe R. Lansdale writes some really, really weird stories. Let's see, The Potato by Bentley Little. That's about a farmer who goes and he digs up a potato, and it's not a regular potato. It looks kind of like a grub worm, and it kind of pulsates, and it's white, and every day it gets a little bit bigger. And when he's around it, he has these weird emotions. He's dealing with the loss of his wife. He's experiencing a lot of grief. Every day it gets a little bit bigger, and he starts to charge people, I think 50 cents a person to come and see it. People come from all around to see it, and day by day it gets bigger and bigger, and then his grief and this potato intersect, and it was really weird. Bentley Little, a lot of Bentley Little's books are written for shock value, or the shock factor, or whatever. But I really like Bentley Little, even though his books are kind of, they're not literature or anything like that, and they're kind of like I said, they are the shock end of the horror novels. But it seems to me like Bentley Little has a very special characteristic, which is that when he gets an idea in his head, no matter how outrageous or shocking or politically incorrect it may be, he will push it to 100 and go as far as he wants. And I rather respect that about him, because it is hard to be as open as Bentley Little is in his novels. Let's see. Androgyny by Brian Hodge. That was a good one. I don't know if I want to explain what that one was about. Stigmata by Gary L. Razor. Let me see, what was that about? Oh, I remember that. Stigmata was about a guy who he's become a drunk, and his wife has left him for another man like 20 years before. And somebody calls him on the phone and tells him that he's found where she lives, so he decides to go and kill her. And he calls a taxi, and basically he takes a taxi ride through hell, and he discovers the truth, and that was really good. Let's see. Slipping by David R. Silva. That was interesting. It was about a man who works at a company that edits films and commercials, and he starts to find that he's blacking out, and he doesn't remember what he's done. He'll just wake up in a different place at a different time, and starts to get closer and closer together and last longer and longer and longer. That was really interesting. It reminded me, for some reason, it reminded me of an episode of Tales from the Dark Side, even though it's quite different. In the episode I'm thinking of, the guy he's a cartoonist who starts to vanish, like he starts getting his mail. I don't know why those two things. He stops getting his mail, people stop recognizing him, stuff like that. I don't know why that story and this one, but they seem to be very similar in my mind for some reason. And it was very good. So that's Borderlands 2 by, or edited by Thomas F. Monteleone. There's something like 20 stories in here, and I skipped over most of them. And like I said, there are some in here I probably couldn't describe very well, and maybe some that would make YouTube angry at me if I even tried to describe them. But it was really good. This is one of the best horror anthologies I've read in quite a while. I think this is from 1991. So if you like horror anthologies that aren't, traditional, and you have to keep in mind this is 30-some-odd years old, so horror has moved on, and maybe these stories are, maybe a little dated or whatever, but they're pretty good. And then I read Take Her Deep by Admiral I.J. Galantin, United States Navy. He's called Pete. And this is about his time as the captain of the USS Halibut. I wanted to make sure I said Halibut because I've been wanting to say Haddock. There was also a submarine called Haddock. And this was really good. I've read a lot of I've read a lot of histories of submarines and a lot of memoirs of submarines in World War II and also the Cold War. And this is one of the better ones. I believe they sank 12 ships, if I'm remembering that right. Let me see here. 13 enemy vessels, including a 10,000-ton heavy cruiser. And it was a really interesting look at his life, his daily life as a submarine captain, having all these people depend upon him, trying to figure out where to go, how to get in position, what to do. Some of the chances he took, which he thought maybe he shouldn't have taken those chances afterwards, he was learning on the job basically, but he'd been in the Navy for quite some time before the war started. He'd already been a submarine captain of an S-boat, which they were really old submarines. Some of them were almost 20 years old at the time World War II started. Very outdated, and they had a very shallow depth and that kind of thing. And the Halibut was a newer sub at the time. And, he goes through talking about being depth charged, being stuck underwater for so long that they start to run out of oxygen. And he did a really good job of describing what different, machines on the submarine did and how certain things worked, how ballast works, how the TDC, which is, I believe it's the TDC, which is how they line up shots with torpedoes, or how they did it in the 40s anyway. It was a computer. It was maybe a primitive computer, but it was a computer where, you would put in the range and it would kind of put the angle on the torpedo and everything. Very interesting and a very scary job, and he talks a lot about the people that he knew who maybe served on the sub with him, went off to other ships, and then, or boats. They're called boats. They're not called ships. Submarines are always called boats. And, they were lost. And at the time, nobody knew why. They didn't know if they were, depth charged, or if they were bombed from an airplane, or if they hit a mine, or maybe there was just a mechanical failure, or something like that. And it was really good. I really enjoyed this one. And if you've never read a book about submarines in World War II, I think this would be a fine place to start. Because it's not dry, it's not overly complicated or anything like that. And he really walks you through, like I said, what it's like to command a submarine, what it's like to be on a submarine, what it's like to operate these different systems or at least, World War II systems. And I was really glad that I read this one. I've had this book for about a year, and I just hadn't picked it up. And I thought, well, that looks interesting. I picked it up, and I looked over there because that's where I keep all my books about the sea over there. And I've got, all the ones I haven't read yet. And I just really enjoyed this one. And it was really nice to read something that I'm already pretty familiar with. It was just kind of as odd as it sounds, I know so much about World War II. I mean, I can't, spit out dates and facts and figures very well, but I'm very, very familiar with World War II. And so sometimes they can kind of be a comfort read for me. I know that sounds strange, but it's just because I'm so familiar with everything that I can just kind of sit back and go along with the writer, And that's how it was for me on this book. And that's Take Her Deep by Admiral I.J. Galantin. Galantin. I'm not really sure how to pronounce his name. There he is in the 70s. And let's see, the last book I have today is Ferocity by Stephen Laws. And this was really good. So I talked a little bit about this in my last tag video. So this takes place in Northumberland in northern Britain. There's a writer 5 years before this novel starts. She was in New York with her husband, and they walk out of her publisher's building, and a man comes up, tries to rob them, and stabs her husband to death. So she has moved off to the country to be with her daughter, and at the same time there's a guy who lives on the next farm over. He's lost his wife in a very unfortunate farming accident, and he's kind of gone off, not off his rocker or anything like that. He's not crazy or anything. He's just very he's broken by this experience because it was kind of his fault. It was an accident, but it was with a grain harvester, basically. And anyway, I don't want to say too much about that because it's, part of the novel to be figured out. But that's told very early on. And he has, in the 70s, in the early 70s, this is true, okay, it was a big deal. A lot of rich people, a lot of chic people would buy big cats, leopards, things like that, and they would walk them on leashes and have them in their apartments and take them to clubs and stuff like that. And the government didn't like that, so it cracked down. And it's thought that instead of having their animals destroyed, killed, a lot of people just released them into the wild. And perhaps there are breeding populations of big cats in Britain. I don't know about that. That's something that people go back and forth about. It's possible, it's impossible. Maybe they're there, maybe they're not. There have been a lot of sightings of big cats in Britain. As far as I know, they're all unverified. But anyway, that's the basis of this novel. He has seen the big cats, and he's been trying to catch one or take a picture of one to prove that they are there. And one night he's driving home, and he gets run off the road in front of the writer's house. And she has a housekeeper who was his teacher. And so, of course, they meet. They have a lot in common, unfortunately for them. And, of course, the romance is going to come out of that. So the car that ran him off the road is driven by this rich guy's girlfriend. And he is in some very shady dealings. And some animosity grows between the farmer and the rich guy. But the thing is, so the writer and the farmer kind of have a thing for each other from the very beginning. And he calls her to come over to his house because he has something to show her. He's very excited, which is that he has shot one of the big cats with a tranquilizer dart, and they're going to go off and find it. Well, at the same time, across town, or it's quite a distance away, which I thought it was too much of a distance away. It's something like 15 kilometers away, this rich guy lives. It just didn't really make sense in context of this story. There are some people who want to rob him, and they break into his house and they kill him, and so at the same time there's a great big storm brewing up. And so what happened was, well, anyway, these robbers and the big cat and the farmer and the writer and her family all converge together. I don't want to give too much away. This was not a bad novel. I don't want to make it seem like it was a bad novel. It just read very much like a B movie, it read like a novel that was written to be a movie, basically. Like Stephen Laws thought that he could write this and somebody would option it for a film and he would make some money off the film. And that's perfectly fine. I don't mind that at all. But I do finally understand what some critics say when they mean that a novel reads like a movie. That's how this reads. This reads like a movie. The writer and the farmer's relationship kind of happens too fast to be believable. I wish that he had spent another maybe 50 pages adding on some depth to the characters and that kind of thing. But it's good, and it reads fast. It's entertaining. This is the second novel I've read by Stephen Laws. I think the other one was called Ghost Train, and I really liked that one, actually. That was a supernatural novel, whereas this one is just a thriller, although there are some supernatural elements that aren't really explained. There are a few plot lines that just kind of fall away. But it was good. It was entertaining. And to be honest, these, what is this? This is leisure fiction. Leisure fiction. A lot of the leisure fiction novels tend to be really bad. Okay? There's no way around that. A lot of the horror novels put out by leisure fiction just were really bad. But they were just meant to be entertaining, right? That's okay. Some books are just meant to be entertaining. That's all right. But this is really one of the better leisure fiction horror novels, and I did enjoy it. So, those are the 7 books that I've read over the past couple of weeks. I hope this video hasn't run on too long. I hope I did these books justice. I doubt that very seriously. So I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.